everybody. Welcome to this week's episode of the County Seat. I'm your host, Chad Booth. We're bringing you our show today from Kane County, from the Kane County courthouse. We are here to talk about RS-2477 roads. The road issue really got its legs under it here in Kane County a little over a decade ago, and it is still struggling on. There have been some changes. There have been some victories won. There have been some defeats that have come along. But we felt it was time after a couple of years to bring you up to speed and find out what kind of deadlines and what kind of challenges lie ahead. So we want to start by joining Cameron Porter to get you in touch with the RS-2477 roads issue and what it actually looks like on the ground to have closed roads.
Thanks, Chad. Here's a question for you. If public access to public land is restricted, is it still really public land? The United States is made up of millions of people who want to use the land in very different ways. Most of those ways require some sort of vehicle access, which is why roads going through public lands are so important. They provide that access. But conflicts over a 40-year-old piece of legislation are causing many of these important roads to be closed.
When Flipman was put in place in 1976, at that time, the roads that had been used were granted to the county if they'd been used at least 10 years prior to that. RS-2477 is the network of roads that we have across public lands, and we have had about a decade of ongoing litigation to preserve those rights and the transportation.
FLPMA also said in that same statute that any road, any RS-2477 road that existed as of 1976 would be continued to be recognized by the federal government.
Pressure to close these roads is mostly coming from environmental groups who make the case that the roads and the vehicles that travel on them are having a negative impact on wildlife and entire ecosystems. Those complaints have led to lawsuits, which in turn have led to road closures. Rural counties are generally the most affected by these restrictions, and their elected leaders have responded accordingly.
We're currently in the process of going through a bellwether process where a special master's judge will come down and will probably sample about 15 of our 910 roads that represent a variety of the issues for all of the roads, and learn about those on the ground with us so that he can prepare recommendations for rulings for judgment on the condition of those roads.
Until such time as we actually prove the road is an RS-2477 road, we as the state or the counties cannot block the closure of a road. We have 65% of our land in the state of Utah that's federally owned and administered. The people that settled the state made roads. They made roads with the encouragement of the federal government. The roads were necessarily built on federal land because that's all there was out here at that time was federal land. So you cannot really talk about public lands in this state without talking about the roads. That's the way the public lands are accessed in the state of Utah.
There is currently an active fight to get these roads reopened, and there have been victories along the way, not just defeats. We'll learn more about this issue when we join our guest panel. For the County Seat, I'm Cameron Porter.
Thank you, Cameron. We are going to now turn our attention to our panel discussion. We will be back with them to talk about the other elements of RS-2477 here on the County Seat.
149 million years in the making, dinosaurs once roamed this land. Now they're found at the Dinosaur National Monument. Let's take you beyond the bones. We call it Dinosaur Land. You'll find it offers adventures and sights not seen anywhere else in the world. Come to Dinosaur Land, Vernal, Utah. You'll want to stay forever. The dinosaurs did.
What would you do with an extra day in Utah Valley? Explore the Wasatch Mountains? Snap a family photo at Bridal Veil Falls. Cool off on Utah Lake or the Provo River. matter what you're searching for, you can find it in Utah Valley. Bring everyone together.
Welcome back to the county seat. We are talking today about RS-2477 roads, an issue we haven't covered for quite a while on our program, but it's an issue that still keeps moving in the background. Joining us for our conversation today is Jim Matson from the Kane County Commission. We also have Phil Lyman from San Juan County. He's the commission chair, and we have Roger Fairbanks from the Utah State Attorney General's office. Roger works on the road section, and so this is an area of his expertise. I appreciate that you could make it for our show today.
Thank you.
So I want to start by just tossing out a question to all of you, is for people who seem like this has gone on forever, but they don't quite know the start point. You know, some people will see it as Paria Canyon, some people will see it as Recapture Canyon, some people will see it as the Burr Trail. Where did this actually all start?
I think the thing starts with a whole bit about competition for access to public lands, and you can go back to the 1964 Wilderness Act. And from there, it was the inability of Congress, I think, to deal with the questions that were still out there and hovering around, to the extent that in '76, when the Federal Land Management Policy Act passed, it also started a process for inventorying roadless areas and wilderness areas. And out of that whole process, we find ourselves today with more of the kind of the backdoor approach to cutting off access to public lands, and it's primarily, I think we see it all the time with rulemaking and the impact it has on us. So whether it goes back to the Garfield County times or the Paria County times, it has its roots in history in this whole thing about the competition and the elimination of multiple use on public lands.
Did the first real closures really start after FLIPMA with the re-inventoring or the declaration of wilderness study areas? Was there much motion on losing routes up until that point?
From my perspective, and kind of going off what Jim was saying, with FLIPMA, it seemed to introduce a lot more influence from special interest groups, and that you see the special interest groups inserting themselves in decisions that traditionally were handled very well, incidentally, between federal government and local government. Now you've got the special interest element that's come into it, and it's getting to the point where the tail is wagging the dog on decisions, and to me that's been the evolution of this, is just that growth of special interest groups. You've got the Conservation Lands Foundation that is throwing $20 million right now just to get a national monument declared. It's hard to compete with that as an elected official. So
if the whole road issue, I mean, we never heard of Title V until FLIPMA. That's Title V roads are a creature that come with FLIPMA. Before that, RS-2477 wasn't really a deal. It's just a local entity wanted to construct a road on undesignated federal land. They built it. And in their reward for helping advance development of the West was they get title of the road. Isn't that how it was supposed to be?
That's how it was supposed to be. The original law was enacted in 1866. It was on the books for 110 years. And the law simply stated that if you build a road on unreserved public land, it becomes a public right-of-way. So prior to FLIPMA, there was no need for judicial decrees or any action by the federal government. If you went out and built a road on unreserved federal land, it became a public right-of-way.
I'm still puzzled by this, though, Roger, because I've read the section of FLPMA that addresses RS 2477, and it basically says that any road that was constructed prior to the enactment of 1976 was grandfathered in and still maintained its public right-of-way without any kind of permitting from the federal government. Why has this turned into such a big issue? That language seems pretty clear.
It's become an issue because the federal government is under constant pressure from environmental activists to close roads. And when they do, the counties, the local citizens get upset about it because these are public rights-of-way, some of which have been around for 100 years. We can't get the federal government to recognize the legal right-of-way that the counties and the state have in these roads. And without cooperation from the federal government, the only legal recourse we have is to pursue quiet title actions. And that's why we've done it. We've sued in 22 counties on approximately 12,000 roads to get a federal judge to actually declare legally that these are public rights-of-way. They don't require a declaration from a federal judge, but if you can't get cooperation and if roads are being closed, then as in so many other situations, legal action, quiet title action is your only resort. It's the last resort.
That leads me to the next question. We will pick up that question when we come back here on the county seat. We'll be right back.
There is a place where looking out means looking in, where an impression lasting only a few seconds will be imprinted on a life forever, where courage is forged and innocence rediscovered, where remembering is rewarding and forgetting unforgettable. There is a place where truth is felt and where seeing is believing. There is a place.
The Utah Farm Bureau has always been there to fight for the needs of its members, with discount programs on items ranging from vehicles and ATVs to health and wellness. The membership fees aren't big, but the results are. We've been around since 1916, and we're not leaving anytime soon. Utah Farm Bureau. We work for those who work to feed the world.
All local products have a story of magical places, real people, and delicious recipes spanning generations. So go ahead and discover flavors you've never tasted and friends you never knew you had. Utah's own Discover Local Food.
Welcome back to the county seat. We are talking about RS 2477 roads today as we bring you our show from Kane County, where a lot of this action has taken place. So, Roger, you left me at a very interesting point. The FLPMA law changed things. We are now going to court over it, but the way the law is written, would any of this be an issue if the BLM had just chosen at the beginning to say, okay, these are the roads that are on the ground, they've been built by somebody, and so they're RS 2477, and it's only new roads, we'll look at Title V. Would that, I mean, wouldn't that be an alternative for them?
Yes. Resolution on determinations about RS 2477 rights of way could be reached by agreement with the BLM and the Department of the Interior and the state and the counties. So cooperation would be a good way to resolve things, but we've learned from years that we can't get recognition of these rights of way.
See, I've had state directors for the Bureau of Land Management tell me outright on this program that our hands are tied because the courts tell us that we have to litigate these, but I've never been able to translate that into RS 2477 because all it says is roads that existed before the enactment date are considered public rights of way. And that's really all the language says, isn't it?
Yes, and I think they're wrong about that. They don't have to have a court tell them that a right of way exists. That's not required under the law, and I don't think it's required by FLPMA or any other.
So do you see this as posturing on their part?
Well, I see it as an overall agenda, of a biopolitical nature in terms of the total direction of which, this is being handled. It comes nationally out of Washington, and it's directed downward, and they're using every tool available to them and forcing us into a very long and drawn-out, expensive process to try to maintain local access. And we have no other choice except to pursue it in this fashion.
I like Judge McConnell's statement that he made in one of his decisions that says, to say that the county's claims are preempted until they are proven is to presume without proof that none are valid. The opposite is the case. These roads are valid until they are taken and challenged, and then you have to go and prove this in court. But for people to be out driving on the roads and have to assume, as is the case right now in San Juan County, where there's a rule that says unless there's a sign saying it's open, you have to assume that it's closed, is to turn this thing on its head completely, and it takes away access from people who are accustomed to access on these roads.
Well, let's clarify that a little bit, Phil. It was basically when we went through all these RMPs in the different districts all at once in 2008, and they all flipped from being cross-country travel is permitted unless otherwise unless
designated closed. Yeah.
Instead of, and it just turned it upside down and say you assume everything's closed unless it says it's open.
Right, right.
So what kind of impact has that had on, say, San Juan County?
Well, I mean, it immediately limited the travel, and we start getting our inventory to give to the BLM, which you got 8,000 square miles in San Juan County. It's bigger than 5 states in the union, and so you got a lot of area there. And they understood that the inventory that we had was the best we had at the time and that it was incomplete. Yet you get a new manager that comes in and he looks and says, hey, these people are breaking the law. They're out driving on roads that aren't on the travel plan, rather than going back to the county and resolving the issue between the federal government and the local government. And usually prompted by Southern Utah Wilderness Alliance or one of those attorneys from one of these large groups, whistleblowing and saying, you've got to take action. They come and they start enforcing closures and with criminal charges and the like against citizens who don't deserve to be treated that way, and certainly the local governments don't deserve to be, disregarded from that conversation when it was intended to be a working process.
You've got Grand Staircase that has just consumed most of your county, Jim.
60+%.
How many miles of roads have been lost in administrative rules over what was traditionally there at the time the monument was created?
I don't have the total number of miles in mind, but I think we've lost close to 40% of that access, just given the fact that they're no longer open for access. And you reach a point where their plans more or less restrict or limit how far you can travel or maintain. And of course, we're not putting a lot of effort and money into the road maintenance question, but we're taking care of damage whenever we have to. So all you need is a good flood and a washout, and you've got an automatic barrier to those. So probably just through the process of doing nothing, over time it closes it in, and then it sentences those lands to being less productive in terms of the ecosystem and how they function, for wildlife and the public as a whole. So I think it's a bad precedent, and it's not serving us well at all.
What about your case?
Well, I was just going to take off from there that the argument that the environmentalists want to put is that we've got other places to recreate. They don't seem to understand that people live in these counties. They work, they operate there, and access in a county like San Juan County with 8% private property, it's like being on an island surrounded by public land, and if you don't have access, you are hamstrung in so many different ways, and your funding is being lost, and your kids aren't being able to keep the schools open, the roads are suffering, everything suffers when you start cutting down access in a public lands county like San Juan.
So, we're forced to litigate this, and how do you make that? I mean, that's like a Herculean task.
It is. It's a Herculean task. We have filed quiet title actions on behalf of the counties and the state of Utah in 22 different counties, as I said, over 12,000 roads. And the litigation has been ongoing now for 4+ years. We are taking preservation depositions of witnesses who traveled these roads 40 to 70 years ago. As you can well imagine, A witness who can remember traveling a road 70 years ago is 90 years old, and we're losing witnesses at a rapid pace. We've probably deposed over 300 individuals, men and women who traveled these roads prior to the enactment of FLPMA, who can testify about them being there and traveling them.
Just to prove that they were there.
Yeah, well, and
much less being on a map.
Was it a Judge Campbell ruling that defined the roads, or was that somebody else that said to be a road you had to be in constant use for 10 years? So in that one court decision, they pushed definition of the road from 1976 back to 1966. Is that correct?
Well, federal law on the issue of RS 2477 adopts state law on the creation of a public right-of-way. And under Utah state law, in order to create a public right-of-way, there has to be 10 years of unobstructed use by the public. And that applies to even private land in the state of Utah. If a private landowner allows the public to travel his land for 10 years without obstructing it, it can become a public right-of-way.
Hence, that's why BYU closes off their parking lot every Christmas.
Right. And so on D roads that weren't built by mechanical construction, a lot of them are two tracks that were just built by passage of vehicles. Those are the type of roads where we have to prove that there was 10 years of continuous use by the public. On a County B road, we can establish that the county built the road by mechanical construction prior to 1976, and we maintain that that's sufficient. Mechanical construction of a public road before 1976. So we maintain you wouldn't have to have 10 years of continuous use. But on a lot of the D roads in this 12,000, we need to show that there was 10 years of continuous public use.
All right, well, we're caught with a break again. We are going to take that break here on the county seat. We'll be right back. I got one more question for Roger, and then we have a request of you, our audience, all across the state. So stay tuned. We'll be right back.
When the road takes you farther than you knew possible, when the world is more beautiful than you've ever seen, when home is more comfortable than it should be, this is when you know you're in Kane County. The perfect mix of rural and urban, culture and adventure. Glendale, Orderville, Kanab, Bigwater, small towns with more to offer than just peace and quiet. Kane County, Utah. Find the new you.
There's a little place on a Utah map where I was raised, where my heart's at, where the sagebrush grows wild and high, and the stars come out at night. Oh, there ain't nothing like being raised in the basin with a Ute reservation, skiing starvation, that Duchesne County life.
Shopping in Davis County has never been better. Experience Station Park, Northern Utah's premier gathering place for shopping, dining, and entertainment. With over 100 shops, Station Park is something for the whole family. Or explore the shopping possibilities this season under one roof at the Layton Hills Mall. Both are conveniently located north of downtown Salt Lake, just off I-15. Come take advantage of special discounts and a wide selection of stores. Visit playindavis.com for more info. Color, it's something that can be seen. But have you ever wanted to reach out and touch it? Experience it. In San Juan County, Utah, color comes to life like nowhere else on earth. Color can be more than an abstract. Color can be your gateway to a new world. Visit San Juan County and explore the past, present, and future in a way that you've only dreamed of. San Juan County. Color your experience.
Welcome back to the county seat. We've been talking about RS 2477 roads. Every time we do a show on this, we get to this part of the program and go, geez, we needed an hour for this, and maybe two, because we've nowhere near scratched the surface of all the questions that are still floating around. But I do want to follow up with where you were, Roger, when we stopped this for the break. In most cases, burden of proof falls to the accuser. They have to prove that a wrong has taken place. And it seems to me, with the way that the RS 247 statute was written, what FLPMA said when it was passed is that the burden of proof to prove that they aren't roads should be the default that falls on the federal government, and that the claim for a right-of-way should be there just because there's a road on the ground, should it not?
Well, it seems logical that that should be the way it is. In fact, when we file these cases, these quiet title actions in federal court, we're bound by the rules of the federal court, and the burden of proof to establish the existence of a right-of-way prior to 1976 falls on us. Now, that doesn't mean it didn't legally exist. The road was there, it legally exists, but if we want a federal judge to recognize its existence, we have to bear the burden of proving by clear and convincing evidence under the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals current standard that the road was there prior to 1976. Now, this is a little bit higher than the preponderance of the evidence, which would be about 50%, and it's certainly not anywhere near beyond reasonable doubt, which is the standard in criminal cases. But the most recent pronouncement of the 10th Circuit requires us to prove the road was there by clear and convincing evidence.
And the only way you're going to do that's by deposition?
No. Deposition and testimony are part of the evidence. We resort to maps, topo maps, historical maps, aerial imagery. Aerial photography has been around since the 30s and 40s. So if a road was on the ground, you can prove from an image that it was there. But to establish 10 years of continuous use, you have to have witness testimony, yes.
What should this audience be doing? I want you to tell us what we need to do to preserve our access to Utah rural roads.
Well, if you're old enough to have driven roads prior to 1976,
or ridden on them,
or even traveled on horseback on them and observed them, you are a potential witness to the existence and construction of that right-of-way prior to 1976. Now, most of our witnesses are all over 60 years old, as you can well imagine. Contact your local county commission, your county roads people, and in most counties you know who they are, and they'll put you on a list, and we'll come down and interview you, and over as soon as we can get to you with the resources we have, we'll find out what roads you know and go about trying to take your depositions.
So the important thing is, if you know anybody that's my age or older and they have enough memory to remember driving any specific route, please contact your county commissioner, your county roads department, get the process started, because you could be the very testimony that saves access to our roads in southern Utah. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for the panel.
Thanks, Chad.
For taking your time to be here. Remember, local government is where your life happens. Be involved, be part of the solution. We will see you next week on the County Seat. If you'd like to share this video with your friends, well, you do that right here. If you would like to subscribe to our YouTube channel, you do that over here. If you'd like to interact with us on the County Seat, that happens over here. If you want to watch the next episode of the County Seat, you can catch it Saturday night at 11 or Sunday morning at 8:30 on ABC4 Good for Utah.